Welcome back to Two Doulas in the Pod, a podcast where we discuss all things birth, advocacy, and everything in between. My name is Fatihma.
And I'm Arlicia, we're your two doula bays. Welcome back to the couch.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Grab your bubbly, your tea, everything. So let's get into today's topic. Today's topic is birth outside the box, home birth, birth centers, and free birthing.
All right.
Yes. So let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it.
What does birth outside of the hospital mean? What does that mean?
So, there are several different ways, there's different places where you can give birth outside of the hospital. You have birth centers, which are ran primarily by midwives.
Mm-hmm.
You also have home births, which can be attended by the birthing mom, of course, her partner, any family members, or birth support. A midwife could even come to your home birth.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
And this is all outside of the hospital,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, and then you have, we talk about free births?
I didn't mention free births.
So a free birth is a birth where the mother or the birthing person is completely unassisted by a medical professional. So, for example, a doctor or a midwife would not be attending the birth, and she could be accompanied by family, friends, or her partner, or she could be completely alone.
That's an interesting concept.
Yes, it is very interesting and a little controversial. So, I've seen some online and I have my own personal thoughts about it. I do think that people should have complete autonomy, like when they decide what their birthing experience, but at the same time, I do think you should have a safe experience.
Absolutely.
So, for example, with the free birth, I think that would require a lot of preparation because, you're completely alone. And depending on your level of knowledge of the birthing process and, what that requires, it can be a lot of preparation that you need.
Well, also, too, depending on the state that you live in, there are some legal implications to delivering at home unassisted.
Yes.
That's something that I learned. I never knew
I
that.
did not know that.
I didn't know I couldn't just, have my baby in the comfort of my own,
Yep.
home, my space. So, what we're encouraging everyone to do is if you're considering this option, of course, you've done your research, you've asked all the questions, and make sure that that is something that legally, you won't be penalized for, in your state.
Yeah. And honestly, to go even further, our ancestors have been doing this.
Oh, yeah.
This is not new. This is not a trend. Free birthing, home births, birth centers, or birthing in a community is nothing new. So I think that the best thing to do is to do your research, get prepared, get educated, and,
Absolutely.
take back your power. We are going into times where a lot of our power is being restricted and our choices and our rights are being restricted. Like, we have less rights than our elders.
Well, times definitely have changed.
Yeah.
Things are shifting in the current climate here. Where
In the
we're
U.S.
in the U.S. I'm not sure about
around the world.
not
It's
sure
kind
about
of-
anywhere else, but I can speak locally.
Yeah.
What's going on as far as just our reproductive rights.
Yeah.
So we ought to stay awake, pay attention, and just be equipped and empowered.
And understand your rights and take your power back. I say that even though when you're entering a time where your rights are at stake or being limited, I look at it as an opportunity because if you're taking away access to Medicaid and health care for people in underprivileged communities, that means that the people in that community need to step up.
Right.
And that's what we're doing. As doulas, as midwives, especially in the Black community, it's our opportunity to step up and take charge and take back what we already know. You know?
Right.
Because we have the skills.
We have to empower each other to be supportive of one another, speak up against the injustices that are being, committed. Everybody deserves the right to good and competent health care.
Yes.
So as doulas, we do our part to make sure that our families feel supported in that way and that they get the information and the resources needed in order to, have a successful and safe delivery. But let's jump back into some of the other options for birthing outside the hospital.
So let's get into choosing the right path, because you want to make sure that, whether you choose a hospital or you choose a home birth or a birth center or free birthing, you want to make sure that this is the right decision for you. So things to consider when birthing outside of the hospital. You want to consider low risk pregnancy status. Do you have a high risk pregnancy or do you have a low risk pregnancy? Because most birth centers, if not all, they require you to have a low risk pregnancy status.
That is an absolute must.
Yes. So when you are working with a midwife, you are required to have a low risk pregnancy status. So access to experienced midwives in your area. Do you have experienced midwives? Of course, you should be vetting your providers. We always say that.
Yes. Keep your list.
Yes. So is there an experienced midwife near you? Consider those things. And proximity to emergency care. In, some rural areas, you may not have the emergency care near you. And of course, having a midwife would be a great option, especially if you have a low risk pregnancy. But what happens if there's an emergency?
Right. Some people live in rural areas, like you mentioned, right?
Yes.
And they have to travel over an hour, sometimes 2 hours, to get to the nearest emergency facility.
Yes.
So really take that into consideration when you're planning what type of birth you're going to have outside of the hospital.
Yes, absolutely. And consider your emotional safety. So do you feel comfortable? What would make you feel more safe being at a birth center? I know from my experience, I knew my options, and I decided that I didn't feel safe in the hospital, but I didn't feel confident or safe birthing at home alone. So a birth center was the perfect happy medium for me, because we had a connecting hospital. I had an experienced midwife who knew exactly what she was doing, and she could care for me just like I would be cared for in the hospital. And I had a low risk pregnancy, so I met all the requirements.
Okay.
And that's what, felt like the best choice for me.
Okay, so some stats, right, about birthing centers. According to the American Association of Birth Centers, people who give birth in such birth centers have had a 6% C-section rate versus the national C-section rate, which is over 35%. High satisfaction rate and fewer interventions, right? So the midwife model of care really believes in physiologic birth and allowing birth to just happen naturally, right?
A lot more holistic approach.
Correct. So the pros of delivering at a birth center is a hybrid between a hospital and at home, right? A lot of these birth centers are set up to feel cozy and welcoming and warm, like you're in your own home, right? Lower C-section rates, like I mentioned, and interventions. It's midwife-led, and you have supportive care. Most birth centers are freestanding and or hospital affiliated, like Fatihma mentioned. So they are connected to local hospitals that are close in range in the event that an emergency takes place, right? Because we can't presume or assume that, I had a great pregnancy and no complications, but things
happen.
Things happen, and we always want to be prepared. We don't want to be left unprepared, and then something traumatic does take place, and then we can't intervene in enough time. Some cons, there's limited availability in rural or underserved areas, and a lot of our clientele that we work with here are underserved populations. So we ought to consider and factor that in if that's available. Fatihma mentioned if you're high risk, unfortunately you're not a candidate for A birth center, also insurance coverage varies.
Yes.
There are some birth centers that only take select insurance plans. Others may not take any at all, and you have to pay, out of pocket for that. And I did mention transfers to the hospital in the event of emergency.
Yes. Yes. And, with all that being said, I think that you really have to know what you want. And with this information, it's not to discourage you, but it's really to educate you because at my midwife, the insurance really didn't cover a lot.
Oh, what did it cover?
It covered maybe like 20% of it. And then the
Okay.
rest, I had to pay out of pocket, but it was something that I really wanted. And just think about the type of debt you go into in the hospital to give birth. You may not be charged up front, but you do have to pay it back.
Oh, I've seen the bills.
It's nowhere near as much as you would pay at a birth center. So consider that. A lot of birth centers do have payment plans depending on how far along you are. So there are options, and most providers like midwives and doulas are flexible. So you really just have to do your research and communicate and find the best facility or provider for you.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about comfort, spiritual intention, and the feeling of being in control when you decide to birth outside of the hospital. Because I really think that when you decide for yourself and plan and educate yourself, it really does feel powerful. You feel like you are in control of your own experiences. Of course, birthing is unpredictable, as we know. However, what if you don't like hospitals? What if you've had trauma in hospitals? What if you've had birthing trauma in the hospital? And that's just not the best environment to feel safe enough to give birth. Because you need to feel safe.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point. So repeated instances or occurrences, you've been in the hospital and you've had these interactions with, providers and the medical team may make you feel, unsafe or unwanted or not heard or
ignored,
dismissed, when you're expressing your concerns. So, it doesn't even matter, if you're rich or poor, your socioeconomic level.
Yep, does not matter.
It doesn't matter. We are experiencing these things on a daily basis, interacting with medical providers in different settings.
Yeah.
So, the out-of-hospital birth is definitely an option for you if these things have happened to you. And as we mentioned earlier, please, please, please just do your research and make sure this is, a safe option for you to, go ahead and, have your baby.
Yeah, and I think in our society today, the mistrust for the healthcare system is growing day by day. And I think that, people should consider their options and get educated on what those options look like and figure out if that's the best for you. Okay, so let's talk about red and green flags when considering a midwife.
All right.
So some green flags is that they respect your autonomy. They listen to your wants and needs. They're clear about their scope of practice.
And they're communicative.
Yes,
They're
communication.
keeping contact with you.
And their services include prenatal and postnatal care. They are culturally aware. They are sometimes spiritually aligned.
Okay.
If you're lucky, if you guys have, and you can search for, if you want a Christian midwife, if you want a Christian doula, if you want, a more spiritual, you can really tailor your experience.
Absolutely, they're all out there.
Just the vibe in general is is it safe and grounded? 'Cause you should trust your intuition when going into these things, and when the vibe is off, and when you have a really good feeling about a space and a person.
And for how long does the midwife provide the postpartum or postnatal care? Because you did mention that.
Yeah. So from my experience, the midwife provides postnatal care for up to 6 weeks.
Okay.
And of course, it may vary between midwives. So that should be discussed when you guys are talking about what to expect and the type of services that are looking for. And then prenatal, I'm assuming as soon as you found out that you're pregnant and you decide to go with their services,
Okay.
then from the beginning of the pregnancy. Let's talk about red flags.
Okay.
So dismissing your concerns, that's a huge red flag. Being vague about their credentials or their experiences, you want them to be transparent. It should be very clear, especially in the digital age. Sometimes we have places where we have reviews, like if they're on a directory, they may have, previous clients submit reviews. I always request references.
Yes.
That way you can speak with someone who has experienced their care. You have a more in-depth conversation about that from a different perspective. If they're pushy or rigid about your birthing choices, not respecting your autonomy, that's a huge red flag. That's a no-no.
And this is not just when you're, deciding to go with a birth center and a midwife, the midwife care model. If you decide to go the hospital route and you're going with an obstetrician, the same tips apply, right?
Yep.
You really need to vet these providers and feel comfortable enough to ask your questions and have conversations with your provider about your overall health, your pregnancy and pending delivery. Yes. So all these things apply even in the hospital setting. So I do want to make sure that we, include that. Yeah. That it's not just for birthing centers. This is for
everyone around you, really.
Right. This is for
hospitals.
Right. This is for hospitals too. Vet your provider. Ask the questions. Yeah. I come with my questions always to every doctor appointment.
Ready.
So, do that. Feel empowered. Don't feel, so small and
like you have to accept anything. You don't.
You don't. Not at all.
You really don't. You really can just get up and leave and just find someone else that aligns with you. And slow or inconsistent communication is a huge red flag.
Yes.
And it's a detriment to you and your baby and your safety and your well-being.
Yes.
If they don't provide postnatal follow-ups, if they're not checking in and making sure that you are okay after you push out a baby, you need postnatal care. It's very important. It's like it can be the difference between life or death. Yeah.
Oh, I did want
seriously.
I did want to ask you, from your experience, and I know like in the hospital, they do assessments on the baby and all of that right after delivery. What did that look like? And then what instructions for newborn care were provided at the birth center? Yeah. Because those are questions that parents are going to have no matter if it's your first, your second, or your third baby. Yeah. We always have questions, and each baby is so different.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So like you're weighing the baby, checking the baby's vitals, clearing their passage, making sure they're breathing properly, assisting with breastfeeding, making sure that I'm latched properly. All of these instructions I got as soon as the baby was put on my chest. They respected my choices in my birth plan, which wanting the skin to skin with mom and dad. Okay. They took care of the placenta. They let me have the delayed clamping. Her placenta was on until it stopped pulsating. We got a chance to look at it. They asked me what I wanted to do with the placenta. Everything. They made sure that they checked my bleeding. They monitored my bleeding for 2 hours after she was born. I got instructions, I got diapers, I got, care, the cord care powder, like to help with, help the baby cord fall off. She checked in with me right after. I think I had my daughter at 11:10, and I was home almost 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, okay.
So I wasn't there long, but I was cared for. The birth center was very close to me, so we were ready to go home around almost 2 o'clock in the
Oh,
morning.
okay.
So when I say that, people are just like shocked, like, "Oh my God, you're ready to go home." And
That's
I'm
very
just like,
different from the
it's
hospital, right?
very different.
Yeah.
Because you can't stay overnight at a birth center.
Okay.
So because I had a low risk pregnancy and, you know, the baby came out healthy, baby's breathing fine, mommy's healthy, mommy's bleeding is monitored, bleeding is normal, no infection. I had a tear, they sutured me.
Okay.
You know, they explained the suture and how I should care for them. They gave me like perinatal care, like, you know, just to soothe and everything. So I was completely cared for. We did and we'll get into this later, but we did the forms, the birth reports, the forms to get her birth certificate and her social.
Okay.
All of this was provided within that 3 hour period, 3 to 4 hour period, after I had her. So very thorough, you know, full scope of care. That was my experience.
Okay. So not exactly like the hospital, but very similar, the same type of care that would be rendered by hospital staff.
Yes.
You had the same type of care in the birth center, which is awesome. I did want to give a few stats before we start to wrap up this segment today. So just from the National Vital Statistics reports from 2022 to 2024, 98.4% of U.S. births take place in hospitals. 1.26% of these births occur at home. So that's approximately 51,000 home births that were recorded in 2021. I feel like that's pretty amazing. 0.39% of the births occurred in birth centers. Out-of-hospital births have increased among the Black community, specifically Black women, by 23% in the last 5 years, although still less common than in our Caucasian counterparts. So I just want to, you know, kind of share that information that, again, like Fatihma stated at the beginning of the episode, birthing at home is not, you know, new to us as a people. It has been a part of our culture, a part of the diaspora for generations and generations. It's just finding our way back to our traditional roots, especially here in the U.S. and the granny midwives.
Yeah. So let's get into the midwife's role, because I really want our audience to get a full understanding of the role that a midwife plays. Of course, they can help you deliver the baby, but when you are deciding to go with a midwife, you really need to understand the clinical part and the administrative part.
Okay.
Because like I said before, they do help you with all these things. So a midwife, a certified professional midwife, and a licensed midwife are trained to monitor fetal heart rates or heart tones. They perform cervical checks if desired. They provide IV fluids or medications in some states, and they manage postpartum bleeding, like I said before, and newborn resuscitation. So midwives document the full birthing process using clinical charting. They file official reports, official birthing reports, and they complete state required documentation like birth registration. They assist the parents with getting a legal birth certificate and the baby's social, of course. And some midwives have secure HIPAA compliant digital charting systems, just like a hospital would.
Oh, okay.
So full scope of care, like I said. You know, these are questions that you can ask your midwife if they provide all of this stuff, and that's a great way to vet them to see if it is the right midwife for you.
Right, the right fit. You want to align, right?
Yeah, because you know, you may not want to birth in the hospital, but you want the same type of care, or maybe not the same, but you want full scope of care. You want to be completely cared for. You don't want to be trying to figure out where to get this from and where to get that from. They should never leave you hanging that way, you know? And let's get into free birthing, because we've talked about, most of our audience already know, you know, birth centers and home births and hospitals. But what exactly is free birthing?
I'm not really that familiar with the free birthing movement.
Yes. So I'm not going to say it's a new movement because it's nothing new, but free birthing is a completely unassisted birth, like we said. There's no medical professionals there. And, you know, some people may choose this route out of, you know, response to trauma, birthing trauma in the hospitals. You know, or they want full autonomy, or, you know, they may have a little mistrust in the healthcare system. But this is something that we want to really reiterate that is something you need to prepare for. So, like, understanding the stages of labor, understanding the, you know, what the, sorry, I had a brain fart. Understanding when your water breaks, what that should look like, to know to look for infection.
Right. Signs of true labor.
Yeah, signs of true labor. How to, you know, get to the baby out. You know, what to look for. How to
position yourself.
Clear out the baby's nasal passage. How to position yourself. Where exactly you should be giving birth, maybe on a bed, or, you know, if you decide in the tub, that's something that you really want to prepare for. You need to get the baby out of the water. You need to be able to at least know CPR.
Right.
At the least, you should know and be certified and, you know, have
when you attend
basic CPR, infant CPR class.
You attend your childbirth education class.
Yes.
They go over the basics, but beyond that, seek out an infant resuscitation course so that you are more than prepared to do your free birth.
Yeah, and I would say definitely have a handheld fetal monitor in your supplies that you have. You know, you should be able to know how to check your blood pressure. So there are some things that you should really know if you're going to decide to do that. And you should definitely be prepared, because you may be alone, or you may be with people who don't understand or don't know the red flags to look for. So we're not recommending this type of birthing, but however, you know, we respect their autonomy, and we just want you to be completely prepared for that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
How can Black families decide what's best, right? Questions to ask yourself. I mean, you've pretty much run through the gamut of what you need to be asking in preparation for any type of birth. And as you just mentioned, free birth, what makes you feel safe? What's your health history? You know, I wouldn't recommend you free birth if you have chronic health conditions. If you have chronic health, or you're high risk, you definitely need to be monitored by a provider. How accessible is your ideal provider if you're choosing to go with a birth center, right? And what does your support team look like? Is your partner involved? Is your mom, your dad, your siblings, a family friend? Like, who's your village? And we talked about that a couple episodes back about building your birth team. So that really is key. And we encourage, you know, shared decision making and advocating for your birth preferences. Advocate for yourself. Speak up. This is what I want. Right. This is what I want. This is what I don't want. Okay. So definitely start having those conversations early, so that, like, as Fatihma has pressed upon, you are prepared.
Yes. And birth in general, but home birth and midwifery, it really does connect us back to our pre-colonial and African birthing traditions. Like we said, this is nothing new. It's not a trend, it's a return. It's a return to what we know, what's sacred to us. And it's just in our DNA, it's in our souls. Like, we remember. And I feel like that's why right now we are looking for an alternative, or exploring these options because in our hearts and in our souls, we remember what it was like to have autonomy over bringing life into this world. And we know that it is spiritual and can be ritualistic in a sense. But now we can blend modern choices and modern care with our traditional practices for, you know, our well-being, for our health, our safety, and our spiritual connection to ourselves.
Absolutely. It's okay to mix the Western medicine with traditional practices. No one way is the right way. I feel like a little bit of both, you know, kind of makes the situation better, and it would make me a little happier if I, you know, had the choice to, you know, I want to birth in the hospital. However, I want a birthing tub. You know, in my hospital.
And it's very possible.
And it's very possible. There are facilities here in our local area that actually have birthing tubs in the hospital. So it kind of simulates like, you know, a birth center. You just want to be comfortable and feel safe in that space wherever you decide to birth. Your birth is sacred and your choice matters, right? Whether you're birthing in the hospital, the birth center, or at home, what matters is your safety and that you're respected and that you feel seen.
So to wrap up, I encourage you to research all your options, whether you are giving birth in a hospital, at home, at a birth center, or even in silence or just surrounded by family and not necessarily a medical professional. You deserve options, you deserve safety, and your choices and your autonomy should be at the top of your priority.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we'll drop some resources down below. Comment, like, and share. DM us.
Yes.
Share your birth stories and your experiences with us. We would so love to hear from you all out there. So just, write in and let us know what's going on in your world. We'll even do an episode where we share some of these, you know, these birth stories.
Yes.
We really want you all to be heard.
Yes. So with that being said,
that's a wrap.
Thanks for listening. That's a wrap. And see you next time. Bye.
Bye.